Wonderful. Then I will get started. My name is Queen Mother Akua Kalia Adaye. I'm the Queen Mother of the Royal Brong Kingdom in Cote d'Ivoire and in Ghana, and I will be sharing more detail about the work that we're doing in the Brong Kingdom for language revival and the post-discussion. I'm very honored to have been asked to participate in this event today in order to learn more about the importance of African languages. Also, I am a PhD candidate at Howard University in African Studies, and it's quite an honor as Ngugi is required literature learning in terms of policy and application. And so he certainly is a powerhouse, even beyond all his Nobel Prize nominations. And so my role today is as your host, and I will help to facilitate the session that we have today. Our interviewer will be Kadija Sesay, the co-founder of the Mboka Festival of Arts and Culture and Sport, of which Ngugi was a distinguished guest in 2017, at a crucial time when the Gambia was changing their government. She is currently writing her thesis on Black British publishing and Pan-Africanism. Our special guest is Ngugi wa Thiong'o. Ngugi wa Thiong'o was born in Kenya in 1938, although he's not looking his age. He is currently Distinguished Professor of English and Comparative Literature at the University of California, Irvine. He speaks around the world at numerous universities as a distinguished professor. Lecture series, including the 1984 Robb Lectures at Auckland University in New Zealand, the first Walter Rodney Memorial Lecture in 1985, Friends of Bogle in London, the 1996 Clarendon Lectures in English at Oxford University, the 1999 Ashby of Cape Town, South Africa, the 2006 Macmillan Stewart Lectures at Harvard University, the Walter Rodney Lecture for the 12th Walter Rodney Symposium for the Walter Rodney Foundation in 2015. His latest book of fiction is Minutes of Glory and Other Stories. His latest book of essays is Secure the Base, 2016. And you can find a full biographical detail about our honored guest, Ngugi wa Thiong'o, which includes his list of publications and awards and achievements, which can be found on his website, which we will post, which is ngugiwathiongo.com. So thank you so much. And we've been asked to share some videos, which I will do momentarily, that will help to kick off this actual discussion between Kadija and our Ngugi.
One of the reasons why this came up as a topic that people wanted to speak about was that the GPAC conference that Mboka were going to hold in May, we were using the AU document as a kickoff point. And one of the aspirations, aspiration 5, is to do with cultural identity. And it basically says, an Africa with a strong cultural identity, common heritage, values, and ethics is what aspiration 5 is. And we had quite a lot of papers that were addressed that. But what was of interest to me, particularly, and I thought is a particular interest to yourself, one of the statements starts, Pan-African ideals will be fully embedded in all school curricula and Pan-African cultural assets. African languages will be the basis for administration and integration. So in terms of, as the way I see it, this document being an outline for an African and next African Renaissance, really, how do we position language in that, in terms of making sure it is like centered as part of the African Renaissance? Is that possible?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, everybody's nodding their head.
Okay, great. First of all, nice meeting all of you, although virtually. Yeah. But it's wonderful also to have this magic, technology magic that allows us to speak to each other, although at different places, and even see each other's faces, right? Now, language is central to any sense of identity, particularly for any people, for that matter. And for Africa and African people, more so, because the African world, as part of the colonized world as a whole, has had its languages completely denigrated, consciously, so much so that currently Africa can only express itself either in French or Portuguese or English. In fact, Africans' own identity sometimes is talked of in terms of Lusophone, Francophone, Anglophone. Is really, that's how we want to be identified as, okay? So language, to me, is very, very central in that. And it does not matter how many languages we have. We can even have 1 million languages. That's okay. They are our languages. The challenge then becomes, how do we make the different language communities also be able to communicate with each other, right? Yeah. So language is very, very, and I'm very glad to hear that AU has put, at least theoretically, African languages at the center of their conception of Pan-African identity. Yeah. We can go, if we've got time, we can, in fact, see how the denigration of African languages was a conscious act of colonization. It was not an accident. African languages did not occupy a second place or third place or even invisible place in the world because of anything inherent in those languages. It's simply a power play between European languages and African languages. And I can give a few examples, if we have the time, of how language was a part of the colonizing project. Yeah.
Yeah, could you give us one of those examples then?
Okay.
What was in your mind?
Yeah, okay, let me try a little bit. And we see commonalities. Let's actually start not with Africa, but with Ireland, which was the first English colony probably in the world, okay? And for a long time, the English settlers in Ireland could not conquer the Irish, okay? So they came up with a strategy and tactics for conquest of the Irish. And the conquest of the Irish mind was very, very important. And this was be done through language. They tried a lot. They even banned English settlers from speaking Irish language because Irish language at the time was more vibrant. And in 1595, a writer you know very well, who was a contemporary of Shakespeare, Spencer, who was a settler in Ireland, wrote a book called A View of Ireland at the present time. And here, two characters in a Platonic tradition are speaking on how to conquer the Irish. And they come up with language and naming system. And they say, if we can get at their, if we can make forget their naming system, there's O's and C's and whatever they call themselves, and then language, then the Irish will soon forget who they are. So this was as early as 16th century. Okay. Let us jump to India. India in 1835. India was an English, was owned by the English company, East India, English East India Company. But in 1895, they were trying to introduce a new education system, and they were debating in London what language should be used for education. And one guy, and you can look up his name, called Lord Macaulay, wrote what is famously called Minutes on Indian Education. And he said, we must stop Sanskrit and Persian as languages of education and have English as the language of education, so as, and I may misquote him a little bit, so as to create a class of Indians in color, in religion, in dress even, but with an English mind, okay? That one you can find even, I mean, you can Google anytime, Minutes on Indian Education, okay? Let's go to America quite quickly. As you know, in America, African languages were banned on the plantations, okay? Yeah, fast forward. But more interestingly, is the question of Indian Native American education. Okay, in 1823, a school was set up, I think, in Pennsylvania to educate Indian or Native American children who were brought from the West to the East, okay? And the moment 3 days after arrival at the school, it's called Carlisle, they were given English names. In fact, they were not even asked what English name you want to have. Pieces of paper were put on the blackboard or on the wall, and each student would point at any of the pieces of paper, but the papers would have different names, and whichever piece of paper they pointed at, the name on that paper would become the name of the Native American kid. And they went through the same thing about language, names. We can go to among Maori, the same thing was done. But what is it common in all those situations? It is that imposition of English or whatever was the governing language was done through violence, okay? Conscious violence, in fact, physical violence against people speaking their own language, and glorification if they spoke fluent English and so on, yeah. There are records of children in Kenya, in Africa, among the Maori, bleeding as a result of whip lashes on their butts and so on, okay? That pattern is the same everywhere. You go to Australia, the same phenomenon, yeah. So the pattern is like this. You associate violence and negativity and pain to colonized languages, in our case, African languages, and you associate glory, achievement, intelligence, and achievement with English. So when you hear English sounds, you hear intelligence, intellectuality. When you hear sounds of African languages, you hear pain, or you sense pain. So, and it's known that we always run away from pain towards pleasure, if you like, right? Yeah. So this pattern is same everywhere. You know, Australia, in America, in Europe, in Asia, everywhere, where there is land conquest, which involves language conquest, the same pattern has applied. Yeah, naming system, language. Let me give one more example. Japan. You know, Japan occupied Korea between 1910 and 1945. Okay, this is not a European power, but the same pattern is a colonial power. The same pattern. They stopped kids from speaking their Korean, or it was discouraged Korean language. Okay, Japanese became the language of power, and also Japanese names. Yeah. So it's the same pattern, you know, which involves conquest. In our case, colonial conquest, and so on. Yeah. But here's the trick. After, initially, there may be resistance, but the children who come after may imbibe and internalize and normalize that negativity towards self as a normal thing. They may not even understand why they feel that about African languages and how they feel that about European languages. It becomes normal, it's normalized, okay? The same thing with the names, again, become normalized. So it becomes, you don't even think about it. So where names are, the naming system and the languages are an example of normalizing abnormality, okay? So for us, the founding base of our culture becomes abnormality, right? Abnormality becomes the norm, the foundational norm of our being, okay? So I don't want to, because I've written a lot about these things in my books, but literally, those are just quick examples that I can come up with, you know. We can go even earlier when the Spanish conquered native peoples in South America, the same pattern. The same French, the same pattern. Portuguese, the same pattern, right? So it's not an accident that African languages are where they are. And that the majority of us, they have come to accept the normality of European languages as the languages of intellectual expression, and African languages more or less as, well, you know, does not matter, you know, or for jokes here and there, you know, or as languages for proverbs and other things, you know, but not really. When it comes to real serious matters of intellectual exploration, technology, science, and so on, European languages.
Okay, so since we're actually talking about the way that African languages are regarded and the dominance of European language, I'm just going to skip through my questions in a different way. And I'm going to bring up that point around this whole language hegemony situation. So in a paper by Dr. Lango Kumalo, he talks about the English language being regarded in Africa, not just as a lingua franca, but as a lingua nullus. In other words, we're reinforcing the linguistic hegemony by stating that English belongs to everyone equally. Therefore, the fact that it is a dominant language, replacing indigenous language, shouldn't actually be seen as a problem by us. It should just be accepted that that's okay. And I'm sure some people will agree with that, but that seems to be very dangerous. And how can we effectively, as he has even used that term, disrupting it, how can we disrupt that?
Mm. No, I say that I don't mean an insult to anybody, but quite frankly, any enslavement, is a success when the enslaved begin seeing virtues of enslavement. That's when, it's complete, okay? Yeah, it is not, English is not an African language. It will never be an African language. And it's not necessary that it become an African language. But you can use English, French. If you know, let me put it this way. If you know your mother tongue or the language of your culture, whichever it is, and then add all the other languages of the world to it, that is empowerment, right? But if you don't know your mother tongue or the language of your culture, but you know all the languages of the world, that's no longer empowerment, it's self-enslavement, right? So it's really a choice between empowerment, which means you are rooted in your language, but you add any number of languages to it, or abandoning your own language or the language of your culture, but becoming a master of all the other languages of the world, right? I was giving an example yesterday. I was talking to the Queen Mother yesterday, I think, and I was giving an example of, it's like abandoning a house you have built and go rent a room, or worse, go and beg for a room in somebody else's house. And now you are so proud of the rented room or the room you are given for the night or for several nights, that you're so proud of it, and you have completely neglected your own house. You don't even want to see it, okay? It's the same phenomenon, yeah. Put more crudely, if you like, I don't know if it's crudely or not, it's like you having two legs, and then you cut off one leg. It's an advantage to have African language or whatever is your mother tongue, and then add other languages to it. What's wrong with that? But colonization has made us become more embracing of European languages as our own language, and silence when it comes to our own languages. There's something wrong with that picture. The assertive embrace of English and French as our languages is African, but the actual African languages, we say, oh, well, those, there's something wrong with that picture.
There's definitely something wrong with that picture. So, but you did kind of suggest in a lecture that you gave, the Steve Biko Memorial Lecture in 2003 in Cape Town. In some ways you suggested, and now this is kind of moving on to cultural memory,
right?
That in some ways that intellectuals, artists, and scholars who are the keepers of memory, those who are schooled in Western languages are basically keeping that cultural memory in a foreign language. And what we really need to do is start having our cultural memories in indigenous languages. So, and very much the same way that I think the Caribbean research groups did in the 20s and the 30s. So this is a huge hurdle, because I don't think anybody would disagree with that, but how can we arrange, or, how can we facilitate having our cultural memory in indigenous language? Do we start from the current generation and then have a large archival project to start having our cultural memory that is just stuck in European languages, to start having them in indigenous languages? How do we kind of get through that, since the very people, the very artists and scholars who are kind of setting this back are also some of the same people who have to move it forward?
Yeah, of course. First of all, I recognize, quite frankly, why people are in the position we are at. I'm not dismissing it, It's not as if people willingly say, I'm going to forget, I embrace European languages and I disregard African languages. I showed you that there's a process which has been there, turning the abnormality into normality. Yeah, and all of us, I included, have at some point become prisoners of that. But let me see what do I mean by storage of African memory in European languages. It is quite, let's get a good example. Let me just put it this way. It's like harvest. You have your own garden, you harvest corn from your garden, so to speak, and you go and store it in somebody else's granary, okay? Right? So you did the cultivation, you grow the corn, but the harvest is stored in somebody else's granary, okay? It's the same thing. If you take any African writer, including me, who writes in English, when the characters we write about, particularly if we are using peasant characters or working people generally, those characters speak African languages. They use African proverbs. When we write that novel in English with those characters, obviously we are making those characters speak in English, right? Perfect, fluent English, okay? So what are we doing? We are getting a thought which was grown, if you like, in African languages or in an African language, but we store it within English sound system, okay? And all African literature by African, now I make a distinction, I'll come back, make a distinction between Caribbean African literature or African American literature. But let's say for the continent, all that literature written by African people in European languages and then called African literature. I say no. I call that literally identity theft. Let me repeat, literally identity theft. And it's a phenomenon all over. It's there in Ireland. Most of what we call Irish literature, like Yeats and so on, or James, for instance, they never wrote in Irish, they wrote in English. And yet that literature has come to constitute Irish literature. That is an example of literally identity theft. Because if you call that literature African literature, what about literature written by Africans in African languages? What shall we call it? Right? So, in fact, literature written by Africans in European languages has come to mean African literature. You ask anybody what African literature is, it's the literature written by African people in European languages. It's like saying, if I'm a French person and you ask me, what do you write in? I'm French, I write in French. I said, what? You write in French? What do you write in isiZulu? Yeah, French literature is that literature which is written in isiZulu, right? Or in Chinese. So if you're a French person and you write in French, no, that's not French literature. That's okay, that's indigenous. Okay, that'll be indigenous French, but real French literature is the one written in Chinese or Zulu or Yoruba for that matter. It's the same thing, right? You know. So, but we can do something about it. We can do what I like to call restoration project. once we have African languages as our base of education in Africa, or literally production and so on, then we have a very important instrument we can use to bring about restoration. You know, I know there's somebody who wrote me in Kenya right now who is translating Achebe's novel, Things Fall Apart, into Gikuyu language, right? The poem which we could not read by Aluko was written in English, and I recited it in Gikuyu. So for me, in addition to Aluko's poem, that was we did a bit of a restoration project, okay? Because I restored that poem, which is very much informed by Pan-Africanism and African thought and so on. I put it in an African language. So I felt very good.
We're still going to try and see if we can get that poem near the end.
Yeah,
we'll try.
I felt very good doing it. I said, wait a minute. It's back. Our treasure, our memory is back, right? Yeah. And we can do the same thing. We have very rich heritage. I grew up as a student reading. I discovered Caribbean literature and African American literature on my own, because in those days, that literature was never taught anywhere. So in the library, okay? And I'll tell you two things which, well, anyway, that literature had a very big impact on me. And what then I like to see, because I felt it was speaking to me. George Lamming, you know, Langston Hughes, you know, I mean, all of them were speaking to me directly. So part of the restoration project would be also making all that literature available in African languages, whatever, Yoruba, Swahili, or Twi, or any of the numerous languages we have, okay? That will be part of the restoration project, okay? Yeah, and we can do the same. All African writings now in European languages can be translated back into African languages, and that'll be part of restoration. So apart from claiming our own languages, doing intellectual production in them where we can also, parallel with that, will be restoration project, okay?
So it sounds to me like you're saying that really, from what you've been saying so far, that it's the people who have to take the lead in this, and that we shouldn't rely on African governments to do it. The very fact that we've got this outline of this African Renaissance is about as much as we're going to get, really. And we should, to make it actually happen, it really needs to come from the people.
From the people and intellectuals. Remember, I'm talking to all intellectuals now of African origin. Very, very important. There are you that you are playing in Gambia, for instance. You know, it's very hard. When you invited me to Gambia, you remember, I was so heartened by what I saw you doing. I was speaking to Queen Mother yesterday, and she told me the project she's doing. I mean, all those kind of things, so heartening, you know, because it's the only way. But eventually, we have to get African governments translating their wishes into policy. Yeah. And
so
for begin, please, wherever you go, please take this message. Please ask African government, wherever you are, to never again never again punish an African child for speaking an African mother. It should be made a criminal offense for anybody, a teacher or anybody else, to give corporal punishment to an African student caught speaking African languages in a school compound.
Yes.
We must stop criminalizing African languages for African kids.
Yeah. I mean, so I actually, with what you say there, it reminds me, and maybe it's a reminder for people, that linguistics, right, rights were first included as an international human right in 1948. And we don't seem to have, maybe are we being impatient, but we don't seem like we've advanced from that. If it can be recognized that it's a human right to be taught in your mother tongue from primary school age, and that in some places that might be happening, but like you say, even now, in some countries and at some levels, they're still being punished or not encouraged.
Right.
We're not getting very far.
I know in Kenya, 3 or 4 years ago, I know that there used to be an African language class, in Kikuyu or Luo or whatever it is, 1 hour assigned to an African language. But the teachers themselves, on the syllabus, it's marked as an African language hour, but they use that to practice English. So African teachers themselves now becoming the ones who are instrumental, even when there's such a gesture, such a policy, they themselves begin fighting against that policy in practice. So we need more of this kind of conference. We need more of what everybody here is doing, and we need changes in government policies. And we need more African people writing in whatever is their mother tongue. And I understand, of course, there are African kids who are brought up as English speakers, and they cannot simply say, oh, I'm not going to write in English because I write in Yoruba, which they cannot speak. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying, if we make a conscious effort, there will come a time when it will be quite natural for our kids to speak and write in Yoruba and Kiswahili, in Twi or Akan or whatever the languages, as their foundation of self, okay? Right. And I'll repeat this, I know I've said it before, and I'll say it again, please, because I don't want anybody to take the wrong message from here. I'm not saying there is absolutely nothing wrong with English or French or Portuguese or Japanese, Let me put it like this. All languages have their own unique musicality. All, okay? Let me give you an it's like musical instruments. The guitar has its own musicality, its unique sound system. So also the piano, so also the lyre. I mean, it's very unique. Those instruments can play the same melody, but the texture or the sound is very different. Yeah? So you don't want to say that, okay, the piano is more of a musical instrument than, say, the guitar, so let's ban all guitars and have the piano only, right?
Yeah.
When the different sounds or the different musicalities or different music instruments come together, they form what we call orchestra or any other form, duets or whatever, right? Together, they can relate in a manner that creates orchestra. But we don't say that the piano is more of a musical instrument than the guitar. In the same way, languages, big or small, have their own unique sound system, in musicality, okay? And there's no language whose musicality is higher than another. You may prefer one to the other, like you may like guitar sounds more than piano, that's okay. But you're not ranking them in terms of hierarchy, okay? Right, and this is what we are doing all the time. We are ranking our language in terms of hierarchy. Even when we come to think of African language policies, sometimes we tend to think in terms of hierarchy, getting one African language to be at the top of all the others. And it's nonsensical. I mean, that's not even how things in nature relate. I mean, cross-fertilization does not relate up or down or something. I mean, sort of, it's more of a networking, cultures, languages in a network of equals, give oxygen to each other. You know.
Okay. I know we've kind of really run into our question time, but it is fine. I don't think people will mind. I have one last question that maybe if you can just, maybe some brief points, or maybe we can, we can take on some other questions and answer it later. Because my thought was, what do you think the priorities are in the next 10 years in terms of centering African language in the African Renaissance? What are the priorities?
Well, first, we need very quickly, we need two things, three things. We need change in African educational policies or government, okay? We need writers who write in African languages. We need publishers who publish in African languages. And of course, we need readers. We have to have all those have to start working together for us to produce something really phenomenal, okay? Right. So, but leave you with one, well, not leave you, but with let me quote Sesay. You know, his very wonderful book called Discourse on Colonialism by Aimé Césaire. And at the beginning, he says, when casting colonization, he's actually said something which I take to heart very seriously. He said, culture contact is the oxygen of civilization. Culture contact, okay? And I say the same thing, that language contact can be an oxygen of cultures, of civilization, or whatever, you know. Yeah. It's when they meet on the basis of hierarchy that one suffocates the other, right? They're not, there's not culture contact, that cultural aggression, if you like, you know.
It is.
Yeah.
Okay, we've got some great questions from people and some which overlap with some of mine. So there's one, it's not a specific question, it's around about pidgin. And I think that is important because obviously we have pidgin or Creole in African countries and in the Caribbean. So where do you think in terms of where pidgin sits in this argument?
The more no, this is, yeah, okay, let me try to explain this, what is important. Languages will always grow, there'll be new languages, will always emerge, okay? And there's nothing wrong with that. The more, the merrier. And I keep on repeating, what has been wrong in the case of Africa or colonized people is the fact that they have had to abandon their languages and embrace either new languages as replacing theirs.
The indigenous ones, yeah.
Right. But what, I mean, okay, in the case of Caribbean people, the African peoples and African American people, this is very interesting. And let me just make a clarification here. African people taken across the Atlantic had their languages banned, okay? They could not speak their language on the plantation. Even the talking drum, the Yoruba talking drum was banned. You know, anything that could communicate, African could communicate with each other without it passing through the master was in fact banned. Now, what did the Africans do? Yeah, it's not that they were taken to the best schools to even learn English, but their language was banned. But note that Europeans did not cut their linguistic connection to Europe, right? So what did the enslaved Africans do? Their language is banned, but they got the rhythms of their own languages, because you cannot ban what is in the mind, and wrap them with English sounds. And you got new languages. what you have in the Caribbean, Haiti, and other places are new languages, also in Africa, are new languages, sometimes with their own linguistic rules and so on, okay? So they are languages which arise out of, if you like, resistance, you know, and they are very, very part of our heritage. Pidgin may fall in that category as well, you know. And we should, again, we should not see those languages as lower, as occupying a lower rung on the ladder to an English kind of heaven. You know, they're not.
Yeah.
I mean, they are languages, and you can know Pidgin and then add to it many other languages. You can embrace what they call here Ebonics or whatever, and then add English as a language of power, you know, and many other languages. There's no conflict. In fact, there's strength. You know, imagine it being at Howard and you are speaking the most English of English, right? And then you go to your community and you're speaking the language they speak, and you can move between the two words freely. Oh my God, that's what's called power, okay?
Yeah.
The new languages that were created by African people in America and Caribbean, what have they given us in terms of musicality, I mean, in terms of culture? The spirituals, still sung today, they come from that linguistic tradition. The blues come from that tradition. You know, jazz from that tradition. Even hip hop, you can say, comes from that tradition. And see how much they have influenced, they have impacted the world. So those languages as well have already contributed to world global cultures and so on. So languages, even Pidgin or other, can arise and even contribute, but it should not be based on the rejection or conscious rejection of one's own, the language, one's culture, you know. Yeah.
So I'd like to thank Hadiza Abdul-Rahman for that question. The next question is from Akila Richards, who is asking, and again, we're kind of going back to diaspora, about, for those who don't know directly where their African ancestry is, and maybe they want to be learning African languages, what do you suggest that they do? Where do they learn an African language? Do they, you know, do they kind of trace back their roots, or do they maybe like adopt an African language that they want to learn?
Just adopt, you know, just, I mean, wherever you are, okay, put it this way. You may not know the exact spot of your origin, but the one thing you are sure of, the African continent.
Yeah.
That one is not in doubt, okay? So if you happen to, like the what Queen Mother has done, I think in the case of, which language are you telling me about?
Brong, the Brong language.
Yeah, Brong. So, I mean, here's a good example with the Queen Mother here, you know, what she was able to do, okay? You can embrace any one language. There are so many languages in Africa, and any one of them will connect you. I personally always recommend Kiswahili simply because it's spoken so widely. But quite frankly, any one language, when you connect, it's so liberative, quite frankly. Yeah.
There's a question from Sakshi Tyagi from India, but Sakshi, could you send that message again and just make it a little bit clearer? It's a good question, but I'm not too sure how to rephrase it. It's about hybridity and characters in literature. That's what she's asking about, but I just need it to be a little bit clearer because I won't be able to. So Sakshi, could you just send that again and make your question clearer, please? Let's see, we have another question here from Patrick Malloy. How should we understand, there's a lot of information here, I'm going to go straight to the question, Patrick. How should we understand African multilingualism? Is this multilingualism rooted in an authentic first language? Or does the idea of a first language in Africa need to be understood differently, perhaps suggesting new notions of identity are different from the European example?
No, I'm not sure I understand the question, but let me say this. Just think of this. How do you say with the notion of mother tongue as your first language? By this I mean, I use the word mother tongue in this sense. I've just written a poem in which I was trying to say that woman is the, I don't know what, you see, is the, I read in Gikuyu that woman is the messenger of God, or rather, I don't have to.
Yeah, I'd agree.
The one who is entrusted by God with carrying life, meaning there's not a single one of us, wherever we are, who didn't have a woman carry him or her for a good 9 months, right? Yeah. So to me, that's important. You know, not even important. It's just a fact of life that we remember that. So we start with whatever language you have, because you cannot undo. If you are brought up an English speaker, you cannot magically undo that, okay?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But you can add to that. If you are, for instance, born, say, in Barbados, for instance, you know, English speaker and whatever, and there's nothing wrong with that. You should not apologize for being an English speaker. But you can add. If you think of Africa, then why not, instead of adding Polish or French to your category, why not start with an African language, right?
Yeah.
So in the same way that you add Japanese or Chinese to your language, why not an African language also? You know, this, in other words, we just let's there's nothing complicated. You start with what you have and then add to what you have.
Yeah.
The problem is that in the case of colonized peoples, they have been made to abandon what they have.
Mm-hmm. Yes, yes,
yeah.
Yes, that's true.
And take on as their beginning point other things brought to them, okay?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah. But if you have English or French, don't, I mean, you are brought up speaking, don't apologize for it, just take it as a fact. You know, then add an African language, you know, I mean, you can add, not take away necessarily, okay?
Yeah.
And as I said, there's nothing, and I want to repeat this because sometimes people ask me, why do you hate English? Or, no. All languages have their own unique musicalities, including English language, in French, Japanese, Chinese, Yoruba. Is that when we think that African musicalities of African language are less of musicalities than, that's where the problem begins. Yeah.
Yeah, I will be, we're posting up a series of links to different things, and there is going to be a workshop on how do you speak Yoruba on the 2nd and 3rd of September, a symposium with the British Library. So that's just been announced, I think, yesterday. So people can check that out, but we'll also paste the link to that. Madeline Johnson, she had a question. Madeline, I'm going to answer it very quickly so we can move on. She was asking about African language apps. Yes, there are language apps, and I think there are actually some being developed on the continent. And I think, you know, I have seen a couple of articles where there are African people developing African language apps. So that has definitely started to happen. Sakshi now has put her question again. How do you see Indian writing in English with words imported directly from regional languages of authors? Is this hybrid outcome viewed by you as a way of protest or identity theft?
Let me get this is a very important question. You mean when, say, an Indian writer or an writer puts Indian language words into the English, say a novel in English, and you have it, a number of words or phrases in Indian languages or African languages? Is that what you mean?
Say that again. Sorry, I'm just reading her question. She wanted to know if this is hybrid outcome viewed, do you see it, would you say is a way of protest or identity theft? Basically Indian writing in English with words imported.
I'm getting it right. There's an illusion. I'm sorry, I don't want to be rude or anything. There's somehow, I don't know how we get this, that especially in Africa, I've seen this aggressive, and so English is our language, and I can be very subversive. I'll be putting Yoruba words in there, to subvert the English. Oh, wonderful. So please, why would you want to spend so much time subverting English? Why not write in in Yoruba, rather than trying to smuggle Yoruba words into English? You can, of course, do that. There's nothing wrong with that. But you are not subverting English. Let's be clear. You are increasing the possibilities of English language, right? You are expanding the capacity of English and French and so on. If that's what you want to do, that's fine, right? But there's at least self-deception to think that one is being subversive. I'll get this in and I'll go there and subvert it from within. No, you're not subverting it. You are increasing its capacity, its range, and so on.
Right, okay.
The best to subvert, you want to subvert right in that Indian language, even if it's spoken by a few people, then the work hopefully can be translated into English and other languages. There's nothing wrong with that. Even European languages gained a lot from translations from Latin and Greek and so on, right? Translation is the way languages talk to each other. I describe translation as the language of languages, okay? The common language of languages, okay? So if you have a few African proverbs in English in a novel, you are not subverting English, not at all. You are saying, oh yeah, look what English can do.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
right.
yeah. Okay, we're gonna get ready. Actually, I think because Tayo Aluko is with us, he's got his poem, the poem that you read in Kikuyu. He's going to play that when we've got the screen, when he's going to share that very soon.
Yeah. Before you do that, can we announce, please, that I have a book, epic, not poem, but narrative called Keda Moyoru. It will come out in English in next month in October, okay? Under the title, The Perfect Nine.
Okay.
It was written in Gikuyu language, okay? And it has already sold in Kenya for the last 2 years. I think at least within the first year, it was able to sell at least 2,000 copies, which was quite huge, okay? Yeah.
So we're going to take those details from you and let people have them in the chat as well, and we can send those out.
Okay.
So we've got the poem. We're going to do the poem now, and then I think we've got about 1 or 2 questions afterwards, and then we're going to take a break and hear from other people. Thank you so much so far. So please, yes, can we have the video from Tayo? Still no sound.
Okay, you should be
The
able to.
poem, Greatness in a Time of COVID by Akua, translated from English into Akua and read by Ngugi wa Thiong'o.
Unene hede ya king'oki ya COVID irefeta morefeti tayo aluko twathamire gwitu wemeshie aine ya nyamo nyamo iria yameririe atigaire aitu igicoka imatahika mwena uria ungi wa thi o iria ningi yaire thahabu na ithaka citu utu witu na umenyo witu uciuri witu na nyimbo citu hithi turi itu ikiundiria ikinora onoru oigana taki ihumbite nguo irahenia igacoka kwiyateanirire nie empire.
Okay, I think what we will do is we're going to send everybody the link because something is not happening. So I'm sorry about that. I think, Queen Mother, have we covered all of the questions? Yes, oh, you've posted the one about the lecture. Have we? I think we've covered all of the questions, have we?
We have a few more, in fact. Yes, we have a Dr. Paul Okogie.
Okay, from Manchester. Okay.
Swahili.
Somebody's got something on in the background.
Maybe a video is on somewhere.
Yes, I think it is.
Please.
Okay. All right. So let's do the question from Dr. Okogie, and then we will take a break. After we will be thanking Professor Ngugi and then taking a break after that. Can you read out the question, please, Queen Mother, because I can't see it.
Since Swahili has been proposed as the common language of the African continent, how can this worthy endeavor be brought about by, and his affiliation is the Africa International Network? And before we address that question, I just would like to say thank you for all the questions that you've posted. We will hold on to these and review them, and they may be discussed in our post-discussion, but they will also inform us for further topics and other informational pieces to highlight in the future. So if they were not raised during this immediate discussion, we still thank you, and they will not be lost.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So Swahili as a common language for the African continent, how can this endeavor be brought about?
Are you asking me?
Yes, sir.
Okay, now let me see. Yeah, Kiswahili, like many other languages in Africa, is a very beautiful language and I think very easy to learn, and it's taught all over. But I want to give one warning about hierarchy.
Mm-hmm.
With Swahili as a common language is a very good thing, but it must not be at the expense of elimination of other languages. We have to get the notion of hierarchy out of our minds when it comes to culture and so on.
So we have to be a Pan-Africanist with the languages as we are with everything else.
We can have Pan-Africanism rooted in our own languages. And if we have a common linguistic language that allows us to speak across the different languages, that's all the merrier, the better. What is wrong is when we say this is the national language or this other language must die. In order for a national language to be, other language must die, must cease to be. It's the same colonial thing.
Yes.
For English to be, other language must cease to be, right?
Yeah.
We had to have adopt the Bantu thing about I am because you are. In the concept of languages as well. Yeah. My language is good because yours is good. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you very much for that. That's an important point actually to kind of end on, is to kind of ensure that Africans themselves, we do not start colonizing, we still not colonizing each other's in
Right,
that
exactly.
kind of sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've got to be as Pan-Africanist about that as we are about all other aspects. You've been with us for quite some time this evening.
Yeah.
And I'd love to thank you so much for doing this. And I know Queen Mother is going to share her thanks as well. And we would just like to let people know we're going to take a 5-minute break. And there are programs, and there's a few people who are just going to come back and tell us about what they're doing in terms of cultural production, creative production, and also scholars who have been doing their thesis in mother tongue, which to me is just like blows my mind. We're finally, it seems like we're getting there. And so people are going to speak a few minutes about that, and we will be posting some links so that people can be sharing those. So Queen Mother, over to you.
Thank you for this very enlightening conversation. I've been receiving notes about how informative and really mind-opening Ngugi has been. So thank you for touching all of us. And we did post both poems. The links are in the chat. And so we're sorry for the technical difficulties, but they are really quite relevant as they're speaking to contemporary times as well. We've also posted a wonderful lecture that's hard to find that Ngugi gave as a part of the Steve Biko lecture series. And some of Kadija's wonderfully prepped questions were certainly based in her over general knowledge, but also from that document as well. Again, we apologize, we cannot reach everyone's question at this time. We're going to take a 5-minute break so we may have a post discussion. And we ask that you do not log out of Zoom, as the functionality has changed, and so we don't want to lose you. And so we'll just have this few moments. There was one question by Nkosi. I don't know, Kadija, if he's been very patient. I don't know if you want to take this one or not before we take our 5-minute break. I'll let that be your call and Ngugi's call.
Okay, so you better give us the, I can't see the
Nkosi. Okay. I'm going to ask Nkosi if you can briefly unmute and state your question. If you can do that in the next, if you can do that right now. We know you've been trying to get your question across.
I didn't see it, so I apologize.
That's okay. There are a number, but this one did get kind of broken up in the shuffle. She said she cannot unmute. Okay. And so, yeah.
Let's take the break and we will get it answered for you. We'll look for your question and yes, we'll ask Prof to answer that. So, yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you everyone for the great participation. We will see you in 5 minutes for the post discussion. Thank you once again, Ngugi, and we can see why you've been nominated so many times for the Nobel Prize. You are really worthy.
And why so many people join this discussion, because you are seen as you call yourself, a language warrior. Which
yes,
goes to show that you don't discriminate against languages. You're Pan-African across the languages. You don't discriminate across the languages. And that's what people need to kind of realize. And you've just really been at the forefront of so many people taking this message and this work forward. It's so, so heartening. And we just so appreciate you giving your time to encourage us, to keep encouraging us to do this work. Thank you.
Yes,
okay, thank you.
And Joe. Thank you.
So we will see everybody in 5 minutes.
Yes, thank you so much. Okay. In the interest of time, I'm happy to defer some of my experiences in terms of what I'm doing for a later time in terms of the cultural production. But in brief, I've helped to revive some of the language that is being used by the Brong community in the Ivorian side in Cote d'Ivoire, and reconnecting with the Ghanaian side of the kingdom, as there's been much language diglosia and really adoption of other languages as well. And so that's been very exciting. And there have been developments of language apps. There are free language and cultural lessons that are happening in Abidjan, in urban centers, as well as individuals who travel to various villages for the language. So that's some of the things that we are doing in Cote d'Ivoire for that revival, understanding that you can still be in your native country, but if you are away from the village, it can be very difficult to learn them. So in addition to other cultural expressions, we have Sumia Jaama, who is the founder of the Sawti Poetry Prize, and I'm very happy to send a link there. And also we have Mukoma Ngugi, who is the Associate Professor of English from Cornell University and co-founder of the Mabati-Cornell Kiswahili Prize for African Literature. And we have Moses Kilolo, who is working on the Jalada translation project. And of course, we have our very own Kadija Sesay, who is representing Mboka, the host and sponsor of this wonderful discussion, and also the Sable Literary Festival. And she's translating classic African and Caribbean works into Gambian languages, which she has already done successfully. So these are the speakers for the cultural production of our language. Okay, and who would we like to have first, Kadija?
Can we have, because I think first of all, I was going to say, I got it the wrong way around anyway. I've just messaged Moses and asked him to speak on Jalada and the Mabati-Cornell Prize because Mukoma cannot make it.
Okay.
And I was just going to I'm not sure if Ngugi needs to be unmuted. If he went away, I'm not sure if we need to unmute him because he was going to come back. So maybe just have a look at that for us. So if you could please as well unmute Moses. Oh yes, he's there. Moses, but he is going, or Moses, can he unmute himself or do we?
Yes, I've opened up so that they're able to unmute themselves. I don't have control.
Okay, okay.
And as well as our, Ngugi, would you kindly unmute yourself as well? Thank you.
Yeah.
And I will post the link for Moses Kilolo on the jaladaafrica.org and place that in.
And the Mabati-Cornell Prize as well, please.
Okay, absolutely.
Okay, is he here? Thought he was here. Oh, here we go. Is he still there? I'm just sending him a message. Oh, it says he cannot unmute himself. It says he says he can't unmute himself. Are you able to do that?
I will take a look.
Mm-hmm.
Just going to. I'm going to unmute also. I'm asking that you please mute if you're not speaking at the time.
Yeah.
Okay.
There you go.
Hi. Okay. Hi. Okay.
Can you tell us about Jalada and Mabati-Cornell, please?
Okay. So I'll be speaking briefly about the Jalada translation project, and just to start by appreciating you, Kadija, because when we were doing translation into the Gambian languages, the Mboka Festival was very instrumental in connecting us to the translators and also publishing translations of Professor Ngugi's story into Gambian languages. And that connection was very special. So for those of us who may not have heard about this project, the Jalada translation project was started in 2015 when we reached out to Professor Ngugi and we talked to him about an idea that we had. We intended to start a translation project as a way of ensuring that we have ongoing publication of stories in African languages. When we had done a language issue before that, it was a bit limiting because it could only be one issue. But if we had a translation project, then it could be an ongoing project that allowed as many people as possible to participate. So the idea was to get one short story and have it translated into every possible language in the world. It's a grand dream, but we are slowly getting there. So
how many languages do you have at the moment?
So from that single African language, which is Gikuyu, now we have 94 languages. And these 94 languages cover almost every continent.
Great.
And quite a number of them are African languages, actually. About 60 of them are African languages. And that is very exciting for me, particularly because the reason why we did this was to be able to start a conversation among languages, and especially with a focus on African languages. So from one African language, this story was able to travel to very many other African languages. Of course, there were a bit of challenges because so many of the translators do not know Gikuyu, which is the original language, but Professor Ngugi was gracious to give us a very good English translation. And from that, so many other people are able to translate. But not all the translations were done from the English translation. So there were people who did their translation from the French translation. So the French translator received the English translation, but translated that into French and allowed, for example, people in French West Africa to be able to translate into their own languages from the language that they were confident in. For example, there was also the same case happened in Somalia, where the Somali translator translated from Arabic. Because they were more confident in Arabic, they were able to use the Arabic language to translate into Somali. So you can see that this language traveled, this story traveled into the different languages, from Gikuyu to English to French to Arabic to Somali and to 94 other languages from across the world.
Fantastic.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And in addition to this, what I feel most happy about is the fact that so many translators were able to participate in this project, and it became like a coming together of very many people who before this time were just working in their own individual spaces, but now they're able to come and engage in this global conversation of languages. And in doing so, they were able to kind of, put their languages on a certain kind of discussion that would not have been possible before. So by coming together, we were able to do something that, was not possible before, being able to do this thing together. So the fact that we did this project as a people that believe in African languages is also the reason why we were able to put these languages in the map and allow different kinds of conversations around translation and activism for African languages. So beyond also the translations, the story inspired various other things. For example, there was a visual interpretation, which I know Professor Ngugi was very excited about because it happened in California where he stays. A group of artists came up with various interpretations of the story through paintings and sculptures. And if you go to the Jalada translation page, you'll be able to see each of those interpretations in terms of paintings. So I encourage all of us to visit that page, and there will be very many other things you will see as well, including recordings of the various languages. So there are audio recordings as well, but there's also a song that was part of the story that has now been recorded by Akua. So it's something that you are going to really get a lot of things out of that single project.
Okay.
So,
could you just tell us briefly about the Mabati-Cornell Prize, please? Sorry, I'm rushing.
Okay. Exactly. So one of the questions we had when we were doing the Jalada project, and which was answered by the Mabati-Cornell Prize, was how do we then support, these individual efforts of these different writers writing in different African languages. And one of the languages that, of course, has been mentioned today is Kiswahili, and it's spoken by so many people and in various countries. And when Mukoma and Hleze met in 2014 and discussed this, they realized that if we can start a prize that recognizes the writers who are working in an African language, it could also be an inspiration for many others who would then be able to put support for people who have given themselves to writing in African languages. Mm-hmm. So the Kiswahili Prize is basically meant to support work that is written in Kiswahili and African language, but also to allow translation from Kiswahili to various other African languages and to European languages as well. So we award not only the prize money, but there's also publishing, and we do a lot of publicity events to allow the writers who might not have otherwise gotten that opportunity to be able to put their work closer to the readers.
Excellent.
So, yeah.
I mean, that's a very good link to the next person who's going to speak, is Sumia Jaama, and because she has started a prize as well in various languages. So we're just gonna unmute her because I've got her right here. I'm not sure if I can unmute her. I don't know, Queen Mother, you might have to unmute her. Oh no, I think she's unmuted. There we go. Sumia.
Yeah. Hi. And
Hi.
thank you for having me. But yes, definitely.
Did I pronounce your name correctly? Sorry. Did I pronounce your name correctly?
Yeah. So it's
yeah. Okay. Thanks.
But yes, so Sawti Poetry Prize is a central part of the project Sawti, which works with workshops, the Poetry Prize and the zine. And so the Poetry Prize and the workshops are both collaborative attempts of diasporic and East African based poets to collaborate and have an opportunity for development. And so the Poetry Prize is both multilingual and East African focused. And so for the first year, we had 3 prizes, one in English, one in Arabic, and one in Swahili. And I think part of what's been discussed today and part of what I end up reiterating for the project is that as a poet myself, and also as a literature enthusiast, in recognizing the value of translation, and particularly translation from one African country, from one African language to another, Sawti is very much in line with that. And so we don't necessarily centralize English for the project. And so we have the judges that we select for each language is based locally. So for Swahili, it was a Tanzanian poet that was judging the prize, and for Arabic, it was a Sudanese poet that was judging the prize. And because Sudan and Tanzania were the focus countries that we were working with at that time. And so in moving forward, for each iteration of the prize the languages that we choose is dependent on the partnerships of the whether it's publishers or whether it's organizations that are able to offer developmental opportunities through mentorship for the winner. And so it's outside of mentorship, the prize also includes monetary value for, as Moses mentioned, for writers who have committed themselves to, particularly poets who have committed themselves to this, and there being a value of their work in that way. And so, I guess in future iterations of the project, we've not selected the language for next year as yet because we're still confirming some partnerships. But I guess part of my question here is, if there are any poets who are interested, whether it's via mentorship or via being on a judging panel for the Poetry Prize for any East African languages, do contact us, and I'm sure Kadija and the host will will forward.
Absolutely. So there's a shout out, 2 prizes, because we know that prizes are very important to encourage and motivate and move along literature. So we've got 2 African literature prizes here that would really relish and love people's support financially and otherwise. So if you haven't picked up their contacts from the chat, we will pass them on to you. I'm just going to mention very quickly what we do with Mboka before we then speak to, and I hope our wonderful guests from South Africa have been able to hold on, because they're obviously their time zone is the latest. What we decided to do, with the great inspiration of when Professor Ngugi came to the Gambia, we then decided that really what needs to be centered as part of the literary section of Mboka was that we would translate works into at least the 3 or 4 Gambian languages. They have 7 languages, so we aim to do Wolof, Mandinka, Jola, and Fuller, Gambian Fuller, because there's different Fullers. And so that was the start. And it really just excited other people. So when we had Linton Kwesi Johnson came, that was a big challenge, because he writes in Jamaican patois, and we had to translate that into Gambian languages. And we were determined not to go via English. And we managed it. We then had a colleague of ours who she's Jamaican and she speaks Wolof. So we said to the translators, if you're not sure of a phrase, please speak to Musafing and she will tell you what it is in Wolof, so that we didn't have to go via English. And in fact, they didn't even need to do that too much. So the next book we're going to be translating, our next festival, Ama Ata Aidu was supposed to have come, which was not able to come, but she said, what can we still do as part of the whole project and as part of me being involved in Mboka? And I said, I'd love it if we could translate one of your books, because I just feel if the richness of African writers are in local languages, then people will realize just how important they are and what they can do as well, in terms of their own work, and in terms of realizing that there are amazing African writers writing in their own language that must enrich you and make you feel great. So we are going to be translating our sister Killjoy into African language, in Gambian languages. So that's the next task, but that's a great task, and she's very excited about that. That's where I am going to finish, and I'm going to ask, we have 2 scholars with us, hopefully have been able to stay with us, and that is Dr. Eileen Pooe and Dr. Kunju. I know I've seen Dr. Kunju, he's still here with us. Are you able to unmute him, or is he able to unmute himself?
He should be able to unmute himself.
So that's for both of them, Dr. Eileen, and then because of course Dr. Kapa, she was not able to attend, but I can read what she sent us. It's just something very brief. So whilst they are maybe to unmute themselves, I will just read something very quickly that Dr. Kapa sent us. Dr. Kapa also, she did her PhD in isiXhosa. I'm sorry, I cannot click properly, my Xhosa. And she's also got a great article in The Conversation, which we will either post in the chat as well, talking about teaching South African languages at school. So she just had something about the importance of culture. I will just read part of it. Because of course, when you get to this research level, it becomes so passionate. Using my own mother tongue to write my thesis tells my origin and identity. The idea is to build a strong relationship between language, culture, and education, to facilitate narration and documentation and composition of isiXhosa as an academic language, to promote indigenization of economic advancement and defeat lack of dignity amongst Xhosa, to restore and sustain respect for people, property, identity, and values as an indispensable element in building a Xhosa nation, to preserve and advance isiXhosa language to get the nation to take its rightful place in South Africa and the world alongside, and this is what Professor Ngugi was saying, alongside Afrikaans and English. As academics, we need to publish journals, articles, dissertations written in African languages to benefit the African child. Not being able to write and receive education in your mother tongue, I would say it's oppression. We need to do away with what does not benefit or qualify the people of South Africa. Colonialism and apartheid in a language regime in which the valorization of Afrikaans and English come at the expense of indigenous African languages, which have been systematically excluded from the political and economic spheres, concedes home language should be effectively implemented to the level where it can be used for academic research and learning to enable students to understand and learn with confidence in their home language. So she has a section called the African Renaissance and Transformation of the Higher Education Curriculum in South Africa. Attention is directed at the decolonization of the curriculum in higher education in South Africa, which aims to give indigenous languages, African knowledge systems, their rightful place as equally valid ways of knowing among the array of knowledge systems in the world. Academics can become agents of meaningful educational exchange and social cohesion by implementing a pedagogy of compassion. The education compromises the teacher, the student, and the curriculum, which unfolds within historical, political, and social and educational contexts. We need to preserve and protect our language from dying. Many people would argue that as for us to master English, we need to practice and read it daily. But my view is, why do we have to bother ourselves by mastering someone else's language that he or she does not even know how to greet us in our own language? If indeed we are committed to being a multilingual society, we must develop marginalized languages for linguistic equity. In conclusion, curriculum transformation and intellectualization of African languages are essential if African universities are to play a critical, transformative, and emancipatory role in society. So that was from Dr. Kapa, who was not able to be with us, but I think everybody would agree with that, really. Yeah.
That's wonderful. I know Dr. Ngugi mentions the importance of having African language be central, and that Africa being the hub of African languages, where, for example, I'm affiliated with Howard University and we are teaching 5 African languages. Mm-hmm. And you don't see that many universities on the continent teaching as many. So yeah. Great. We have a representative, Kadija, for Dr. Eileen Pooe. So okay. If we may do that, okay.
Yes, yes, please.
Thank you. And is it Shola? I see your number. Is your name Shola?
But then also, and then Dr. Kunju is also going to speak as well. Is he? Was he there as well?
Okay, I'm not sure. Someone reached out to me to speak on behalf of Dr. Pooe.
Yeah, if they can go ahead and do that, that'll be great.
It says it's muted. You have to unmute yourself. All the controls on our end are open. Okay. Well, while we wait. Okay, great. We've got some more. I'll send some information that I have for Dr. Eileen Pooe, and I think we can move on.
Okay. Is Dr. Kunju there?
Yes.
Sent him a message.
Okay.
He's here.
He's here?
Yes.
Yes.
Hello.
Okay, hello, everybody.
Hello. Greetings.
Yes.
Thank you.
Greetings to everyone. I don't know if it's morning or evening or what, but I mean at night. Okay, but greetings to everyone, and thank you so much for having me. And it was such a great privilege to sort of be in a virtual presence of Professor Ngugi as well, and everyone else. It was so I'm so delighted. So thank you so much, Kadija, for getting in touch with me. All right, okay, I've been given 2 minutes to just talk about, my name is Hleze Kunju. I'm in South Africa at Rhodes University. In 2017, I was I wrote my PhD in African languages in isiXhosa, which is my mother tongue. And that was something that hadn't happened before at Rhodes University. So I come from about a village which is about 4 hours away from the university, Rhodes University, and at school I was taught in isiXhosa, which is my mother tongue. And everything we did, even English was taught in my mother tongue. So I got a very big shock when I got to university and realized that everything was now the other way around. Everything was taught in English. So you can imagine doing your first year in a class with people whose English is their mother tongue, majority of them, and you've just been exposed to this language and you must get a degree in 3 years' time. So you can imagine what a nightmare that was. And but of course I had to learn, you know, we all do that. Even still today, some people have to go through that. So what that really puzzled me a lot, you know, and also I studied music, drama, and African languages. And I knew that in South Africa, maybe not just only in South Africa, but also in Africa, we have so many brilliant musicians and performers within the drama, but none of them were in the curriculum. So in the music department, it was all about Mozart, Verdi, Handel, and so on. With drama, it was the Grotowski, the Stanislavski, and many others. But there were no people or people that we know from Africa that we could study about. So that really bothered me a lot. So when I realized that, fortunately in South Africa, we've got such a brilliant constitution, first of all, that accommodates African languages, and universities and many different institutions have language policies that also accommodates these languages. But the one thing that is missing is implementation. We boast about these wonderful policies and constitutions, but when it comes to the implementation, in my view, there's a huge lack. So research is very important, and discussions about how we can implement and so on is very important, and transformation discussions are so important. And also, of course, if I didn't had Prof. Ngugi's Decolonizing the Mind,
did you want to get signed?
As one of my Bibles, I probably wouldn't be talking to you right now. So all this work is important. But one thing right now, currently, that I think is very important is implementation. That is also one of the things that encouraged me and inspired me to write this, the PhD in my mother tongue. So, and after that, I always say to my colleagues and everyone who are writing in African languages, or written, especially PhDs in African languages, I always say, colleagues, we haven't come this far just to come this far. We've come this far so that we can help others to come to where we are and way beyond. So I feel like right now in my life, my purpose is to make sure that there are many students who are writing in African languages, because when you ask these questions about implementation, you get answered by questions that who is going to write this, who's going to publish this, and if it's a thesis, who is going to examine this, where is it going to be examined, because we've never had anyone doing this, so who's going to do this? And I say this, it's up to us to make sure that those questions are no longer questions in the next decade. They don't exist, by making sure that we assist other students. So I am currently heading the creative writing section at Rhodes University. And so far, in the past 5 years, I have supervised I supervise in both languages, English and in African languages. But I will only talk about the students that I've supervised in African languages. I've got about 8 who've already graduated, who've done their masters in African languages.
Fantastic.
And that's for the first time that happens in our university, which is in the Eastern Cape, where the majority of the people in the Eastern Cape are isiXhosa speaking people. So 8, and currently have 5 who are also going to graduate by the end of this year. So by the end of 2020, there will be a total of 13. And that's obviously going to double or even be more in the next 5 years, and so on. So, and also my first 2 students who wrote in the African languages are both enrolled for PhD. One is completing his PhD at the University of Cape Town, writing in isiXhosa, and one is at the University of South Africa, also writing in isiXhosa. So the more we produce these people, the more they also produce other people. I mean, currently in touch with them, and also using them, you know, in talking and how we can do these things. Because really, there's a lot of, as I said, there's a lot of discussions that we have, a lot of conferences. We spend days, 5 days of a conference and so on, talking about how this can be done, talking about the history of this, or talking about how we got to where we are. But there isn't much when it comes to what have we done, what challenges have we come across while trying to produce knowledge in African language, producing academic literature in African languages. So that is...
We're going to ask you to wrap up in a moment, because I agree, this is why we wanted people to speak, but we really think that this is just a jump off platform, and we are going to try and arrange something to discuss this more, because it's very important. And so that people can learn in other countries, people can learn from what you're doing.
Yes, lovely. Okay, thank you. Yes, well, in wrapping up, really, a translation also, as Prof. Ngugi has mentioned, it's very important. I also focus on translation, which I have to in creative writing, because there's a lot of African literature written in English. So I do repatriate that into isiXhosa, so that we can have material in creative writing as a field that is available in African languages as well. All right, thank you so much.
Thank you. Glad we found you.
Absolutely.
So, Queen Mother, there is one person left to speak, isn't it, who's speaking on behalf of Dr. Pooe?
Yes, Dr. Pooe is having connectivity issues, and I believe we have Professor Shola who can speak on her behalf. I don't know if he's available. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. Am I on?
Yes, you are.
Yes, okay.
Thanks. Dr. Pooe got cut off. She was my student. I supervised Setswana thesis on what we call a repatriative transcription of African literatures by Africans written in English back into the languages of these African writers and their communities who happen to populate their fictions, for instance, as characters and so on. And we took Sol Plaatje. I hope everybody knows Sol Plaatje. Sol Plaatje's Mhudi novel as an example. And we felt, for instance, Sol Plaatje was going to be celebrated this year. In fact, the 90th year celebration of Ngugi's publication. And we felt that, you know, this is a novel by a Motswana, an African, about an African plight, but it's being celebrated by an English world. And we submitted that, you know, we regard Ngugi as a Setswana novel just exiled in the English language. So The thesis is about that. It's about theorizing the transcreation of Ngugi as essentially a Setswana novel from English into Setswana. Not that it's published in English. And so we use that as an example. This project, the thesis, on which the thesis is based, is also part of a project very similar to Professor Ngugi's restoration project. And we started it many years ago. We mooted it many years ago, but this side, we call it a repatriation of letters. That is we regard African writers in European languages as linguistically exiled. And we want to repatriate them back through reimagining them in the languages of the author. And that project, the repatriation of letters, is underway. A number of works have been already being translated. We have a publisher and the sort of like backing of that project. This is as much as I have prepared, but I'm just saying I see a similarity between what is being done for the Gambian languages, firstly, and secondly, what Professor Ngugi calls a restoration project. I myself have collaborated on the translation of for instance, Cheve's Things Fall Apart, and also, although it's not published yet, the translation of Mandela, in that sense of, bringing back these works to where they belong, where they are needed most, because they are written by the African language speakers about Africans for an African audience primarily. But because, we already think, important things should be said in English, they are there in an English world. And like I said, Ngugi is being celebrated by an English world to the exclusion of the people whom the book is all about.
Thank you so much. Thank you for, I know she said some of her supervisors and other colleagues will be here, so that's great that you were here to share that, and so that people know the work that she is doing. Queen Mother, I'm passing on to you to wrap up. Thank you.
Thank you everyone for your participation. This was really wonderful to have a post-discussion about the practical application from a cultural perspective, as well as the intellectual memory and restoration of African languages. And we thank you so much for what you've shared. And I will take a moment to share a little bit about how we are reviving the Brong language in Cote d'Ivoire, since I've gotten a number of inquiries from you in the chat. But practically, we decided to not wait for anyone. And so we have established WhatsApp groups where we have frequent language and translation. It's done primarily in French, but sometimes in English as well. And we have members of those WhatsApp groups. And it's done really through a systematic way, through a curriculum. We also have a Facebook page where we teach the origins of traditional African languages. And that's a way of really highlighting where the words come from, the etymology, the explanation of the variations of the word. And it's really been a great source of pride. I added a link to that you can see in our Facebook page. So that was another way the community has come together and really has created a safe space to say, I don't know. And that's something we need to encourage. The policy is important, the support is important, but agency amongst the communities can happen effectively now. As I mentioned, we have linguistic or language volunteers who travel to various villages on Sundays, and we also host separate language dance and history lessons in Abidjan that is located with the First Day of Houphouët-Boigny at the Arts Center. And so that's the space we're able to convene, and it's open to people beyond those who are from the Brong Kingdom and ethnicity. And so that's really helped with cohesion, so we can appreciate all the contributions that everyone has made. Lastly, we have a weekly radio spot on the national radio on Fridays where we teach the Brong language. So these are all low-cost opportunities. It's a matter of pride. I'll share with you that I am African American, and I was installed twice as Queen Mother, as I was the first ancestor to return to the village in over 400 years. And so it's been a learning process for all of us, for me to have this great honor sitting on a throne in Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana. As such, I use my own vulnerability of learning really as an invitation for everyone to learn. And I do believe that has helped to inspire some of these activities that many people have taken on themselves. And so one of the first acts that I did, I am a published poet, and I thank Sable Magazine and Kadija for supporting me in that endeavor. And so I wrote poetry in traditional language and read it on live TV in front of thousands of people and on 12 live radio stations. And that helped to inspire people to say, okay, if she was not exposed to the language, if she was born in America and she is speaking this language, then there's value in it and it's possible. So we are so excited for all of our wonderful speakers. We want to thank Ngugi for really leading the charge. You are a warrior of the African.
As they say, he's a legend.
You are a legend. And so, you know, we thank you, and I hope that this does inspire you, and for the great work of our intellectuals who are paying it forward and understanding how this can multiply. Many times there's an argument that the plethora of African languages is impractical, but there's beauty and wisdom and cosmological beliefs and philosophies and ideas that are so rich. And as we heard Professor Shola say, really written for us, children of Africa, across the diaspora, for us, we want to make sure that that message is heard. So thank you for those prizes and really coming together, understanding the impetus for that and the value of our intellect and contributions. But we also say that we can start now, whether it's through cultural expression, through community, village engagement, through these intellectual channels, and certainly for policy advocacy as well. And I'm very excited to have this wonderful range of interested participants really representing corners of the world. You were letting me know the various countries where you are currently residing or where you're from, and it's very, very exciting. So Mboka Festival, thank you so much. The vision is huge, and you know, Kadija was so humble. She did not set this up. Yes, bravo. She did not set this up to showcase how awesome Mboka is, but naturally it was so supportive and conducive that in the presentations we heard, we understood how the connectivity happened, right, from Patois into languages, and really doing that. So thank you, where we're able to showcase really the fruits of the seeds that you've planted. Only 2017, right, is when some of these engagements came, and we're hearing about really great manifestations and accomplished projects and works in progress today. So I thank you. And I'm going to close out with a little secret. That secret is Njogu. Njogu is Kikuyu for elephant, and Ngugi is indeed an elephant. So
Yes.
we honor him as Njogu. I think we have other Njogus as well. No?
Yes.
Okay, well, we'll say Ngugi is the Njogu, and we have proof, because if you look at his background, you see these elephants here? You are a giant, and we are grateful for your infinite memory, right? And you are a sage, and you are a pride of Africa.
Absolutely.
So we thank you. And it is okay to start small. When I had the privilege of working with Kadija and Ngugi to set this up, you know, he encourages, and I posted some of these videos, when you travel somewhere on the continent, or if you meet someone from the diaspora, just ask a few words. Expand your repertoire just by a greeting. How do you say hello? How do you say thank you? And in the conversations that we had in the previous discussion and in our post discussion we're wrapping up now, we understand that there's a grace, right? And an acknowledgement and seeing and a sense of worth and learning those things. And so we have big works ahead of us and major undertakings, which I'm very excited about. But I think in terms of our connectivity, that we can also do it at an organic level as well.
But I'd just like to say at the end of that connectivity, the way myself and Queen Mother Kalia came together was through a wonderful Pan-African friend of ours who was resident in Washington, D.C., who unfortunately passed away a few months ago. And we actually, the actual irony of it is that Professor Ngugi's poem, the last stanza, you have to read it. Dawn of Darkness was so amazing. I read it at his memorial because it is filled with hope. And it is filled with hope for us in these pandemic times, pandemic of coronavirus and pandemic of racism. And so, you know, please read his poem. So that connectivity was also there. And that is why that Pan-Africanism, for me, is like equality and unity. It is not just an African equality and unity. So that's very important. So thank you so much, everyone. If people feel, when we speak to people about carrying on the conversation, but not only carrying on the conversation, for the people to move forward with projects, maybe they've learned something from listening to speakers this evening in terms of something that they can do, but also ways that they can support, that would be great. And we need to carry this on across globally, which we've done this evening. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody, and thank you for staying with us. We know we ran over a little bit, but thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Kadija. Excellent job. Support Makoba Festival as well, and we will look for Ngugi's works that are coming out. So thank you. I hope everyone is feeling encouraged, and we must support Kadija and the great works of Mboka. Thank you.
Thank you.